Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 5 in palette week, where every single day for 7 days straight I am posting some sort of palette themed content on my channel. And today I have an updated version of the palette tag that was created by Samantha and Allie Glines, I think 2 or 3 years ago at this point in time. This will be my 3rd time doing the tag. They did do an updated tag, so I'm combining the two. Like, they've done 2 separate palette tags, and I'm going to combine all the questions into one video today. I'll leave my palette playlist linked down below, where you will find my previous years that I've done this palette tag. But I think it's fun to update just because my palette collection grows every year, and you know, our makeup tastes change as well. So it's just fun to do the tag each year, in my opinion. At least that's what I think. So I have at least 20 palette questions to answer. I tried to do no repeats, so we could talk about as many palettes as possible. But if you're interested in my updated version of the palette tag, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. I've been trying to be better about wearing my jewelry and just realized I don't have jewelry on, but it's okay. I'm too lazy to stand up and go put some on. I also kind of want like more, I want my lips to be glossier, but I don't know if this is the vibe. This is Pop Coral from the Clarins Shimmer Lip Oil line. I don't know that that's the vibe, but that's okay. Okay, you guys, let's jump right into the questions. I'm super excited to talk about just so many eyeshadow palettes with you today. So we're gonna kick it off with show us your newest palette. And the newest palette in my collection is this one from Too Faced. This is the Italian Spritz palette. And I could not, like, absolutely could not say no to this one. I love the color story. I just think it's so bright and fun, just like perfect for this time of year. And honestly, like the packaging as well. Like, I really just couldn't say no to this. So this is the newest palette to my collection. I haven't really played around with it yet, but I'm super excited to. And then the flip side of that is show us your oldest palette. And my palette collection, like, I don't know what my oldest is, so I'm kind of guessing. There's like, it's between 2, and I'm not 100% sure, and these might not even be my oldest. I just don't know for sure. But the Persona palette, the Persona Identity one, is definitely very old in my collection. This is an absolute favorite palette of mine. I am considering at some point replacing this, but the quality of mine still performs just fine, so I struggled to purchase another one. I know there's different packaging now, but I struggled to get myself to purchase another one when I have this one that works just fine. And then I also have my Huda Smoky Obsessions, which has also seen better days, but another favorite in my collection. Obviously, these have both survived many a declutter throughout their life, so clearly they're favorites. Next is show us your most expensive palette in your collection, and for me that is the Natasha Denona Biba palette. This is one of the larger Natasha palettes, the $129 ones. It is just a neutral lover's dream. I definitely have not given this palette the love it deserves, especially considering like these shades are just like right up my alley from day to day. So I definitely need to be better about using this. Hopefully maybe this will get pulled into like my No Pan Left Behind, and I can get better use out of that. And then the flip side of that is show us your least expensive palettes, and I believe that would be my ColourPop quads. I am definitely a little bit more like bougie when it comes to my eyeshadow. I just like to splurge, and I don't love drugstore eyeshadow that much, so I don't have a lot of options in my collection. So I do believe that the ColourPop quads are my least expensive palettes in my collection. Next up is show us your everyday palette, and for me, I could have done Natasha Denona Mini Nude, but I believe that's what I showed last year, so I decided to change it up and go with the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 1, because this has more options than the Natasha Denona Mini Nude, and this is just a very everyday palette for me as well. I love the tones in this palette. I love the cream shadows in this palette. I like the textures in the shimmers and the neutrals, and overall this is just a knockout palette. I'm so glad to have this in my collection. I am super excited. Hopefully Patrick Ta will release another palette this year, and I would definitely be buying that. Next is show us your most colorful palette in your collection, and it's between this palette and another palette that I have for an answer down the road, so that's why I'm going with this, even though it might be like second most colorful. I'm not quite sure, but I think this might actually be the most colorful. This is the Glamlite Cake palette, and I think this one is a little bit more colorful than the Ice Cream Dream when I look at the two side by side. Even though I think this one has less shades, this one is just like so bright and vibrant. And I am very intimidated by this palette, but I also love having this in my collection for any time that I am looking to do a colorful look. I have great quality colorful options that I can use within this palette, and I honestly need to pull this out and use this more and just have some fun with it because it's such a fun palette, such good quality. Glamlite never disappoints. It's a very awkward palette to store because it is so large, but I do love that one. The next question is show us your smallest palette, and rather than show you like my Aether Beauty quads, I tried to do like an actual like palette, which I thought in my head would, how many shadows would be considered a palette over like, I mean, there's the quads, but then there's like 5 pan palettes. Anyway, I decided to go with the NARS Suede palette because this is just a little 6 pan. It's super tiny. I think smaller even than the Huda Beauty. Yeah, smaller even than the Huda Beauty 9 pans. So I thought that this would be a good option for an answer here. I love this little palette. I feel like it's perfect for work travel for me just because I can use this shade as like a one shadow in my crease and done, but I can also like glam this up if I want to. I have really nice like more satin, more subdued shimmers that I feel like are more like work appropriate, if you will. And I'm really glad to have that in my collection. It's obviously not like a favorite, but I feel like it's like a staple palette. The next question is show us your largest palette, and this is the other one that I was trying to decide if this is my most colorful palette, but this has quite a few neutral options. This is the Be Perfect Carnival 3, and this is by far my largest palette in my collection. And while there's color in here, I feel like this is more colorful. You know what I'm saying? But this is my largest palette. I think this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 5. There's 40 shades in here. This is a very overwhelming palette. To me, I rarely reach for this. But it's a nice option to have in case I'm wanting to, you know, again, experiment with color. I also wanted to try the Be Perfect formula, but I'll be honest, this palette does not get a lot of love for me. Next is show your palette with your best memory tied to it, and this was an easy one for me. I have the Dose of Colors Friendcation palette, and I pulled this because I've mentioned a couple times recently on my channel that this is like my go-to palette for country concerts. I love country music, and I was not always a country music girl. I vividly remember my best friend and I driving, and this was like when like you still had like CDs you would play in your car. I know I'm that old. And she was playing country music, and I turned to her and I was like, are you seriously like offending my ears right now with country music? Also, do I even know you anymore? Like, when did you start listening to country music? And it was like a CD she burned for herself, and I literally like hit eject and like threw it out the window. Thinking back, I'm like, that was like really not very nice. I mean, we had that type of relationship though, where like we would laugh about things like that. And then a few years later, I became truly obsessed with country music. My friend group and I just absolutely love going to country concerts. I usually have way too much fun at country concerts. I have some hilarious stories about country concerts, but I always bust out the Friendcation palette when there's a country concert to go to. So that's why I decided to share that palette. The next question is share a palette that is worth the hype. And for me, I kind of have like a whole brand, and it's Odin's Eye. Odin's Eye's formula is my favorite eyeshadow formula. I think they kill it with mattes, and they absolutely destroy it when it comes to their shimmer formula. They have beautiful duochromes, multi-chromes, just beautiful textures amongst their like shimmer and foiled metallics. And they have just like the best color stories as well. I grabbed of course the Christmas and Christmassy, which you can't get anymore. But the newest collection, like the Sea Talk palette, I'm forgetting the other two, but just Odin's Eye in general, like truly kills it when it comes to eyeshadow, and they are definitely worth the hype. And then the flip side of that shows a palette that isn't worth the hype, and I have two. First, I have the Charlotte Tilbury quads. Mine specifically is an Exaggerize, but I don't get the hype around the Charlotte Tilbury quads. Like $54 for 4 eyeshadows that like, for like every day, like you get like these very beautiful like minimalistic looks, but like you're spending $54. I think it's 54, is it 53? You're spending over $50 for 4 eyeshadows that like, it's not like they're like special shades like Pat McGrath special or indie brand special or these like multi-chrome shades. You're literally like, what? I truly don't understand the hype. I just truly do not get it and do not understand the hype around the Charlotte Tilbury quads. I also own, I'm gonna grab it right now, I have the Charlotte Tilbury Easy Eye palette, like the dark, like this. Like it's fine, but like I think this is like $75. I got this in my Beautylish Lucky Bag. This is not worth $75. I don't even, like $20 maybe. I don't get the hype around Charlotte Tilbury's eyeshadow. And then I have a second palette to include because I just like needed to take a moment to like circle back and roast this palette a little bit more. I feel like this was getting a lot of buzz when this released. I don't necessarily know that there's like a lot of hype around this. I don't know if you can still get this anymore. I think it was limited edition. It's the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes, and I was so excited for this palette, and boy, what a letdown. And I know that I think this palette is supposed to be used where you just do like a matte shade and then a shimmer shade rather than like build up this like beautiful look. But I just feel like the mattes did not perform well when blended together. And you have these really beautiful shimmers, but like this palette was $68 and it just should have been better. Like it should have been so much better. I love the idea behind this palette, but like execution just was a total miss in my opinion, and kind of wish I didn't spend my $68 on that. Next up is to show a favorite palette from a favorite brand, and I obviously love Odin's Eye, and I was thinking of choosing the Hello palette, but I also have this for an answer down the road. So I wanted to do Huda Beauty, which I absolutely love the Huda eyeshadow formula. I think it can be really hit or miss, but I always get excited for Huda's palette releases. And you guys, I was just looking on the Sephora website, and I don't think the Mercury Retrograde palette is available on Sephora anymore, which makes me so sad because that is a favorite palette from Huda. But I also was so impressed with the Huda Empowered palette that she recently launched this holiday. I feel like this is a little bit different than like what she normally does, while still kind of being what she normally does, but I feel like this one is significantly like more deep than some of the other palettes that she's released. And I actually ended up liking this palette more than I thought that I would when I first saw the pictures, just because I felt like some of the shades looked a little bit intimidating to me. But the shade Manifested, I absolutely love. Bold Moves, Visionary, Do It. Huda always knocks it out of the park with the metallic foiled shimmer, like just a variety of textures, especially in her larger palettes. But I wanted to include this palette because I wasn't expecting to love that one as much as I did. Next up is your most used palette, and that would hands down be my ABH Sultry palette. I'm not going to open this palette because this is my current Pan That palette. I will be updating my Pan That palette in just a couple of days, so I don't want to spoil anything. But even before I included this as my Pan That palette for 2023, this was my most used palette in my collection. I have just gotten so much use out of this palette throughout its lifetime. It's such a pretty palette, and I just absolutely love it. So, most used palette, ABH Sultry. And I do track my palette usage and have for the past several years, so like it isn't just the one I think I use the most, it's the one that like I actually have used the most. The next question is an all-time favorite, and instantly this is the palette that came to my mind when I just think of an all-time favorite, and it's the ABH Jackie palette. There's just something about this palette that has always just been so special in my mind. I think it's because this sponsored shade was the shade that like made me fall in love with green eyeshadow, and boy, we've come a long way, and I really have grown an intense love for green eyeshadow over the years. But it also had just like some really beautiful rich warm brown mattes that I absolutely loved, and then the shades Soleil and Zam are just so beautiful in terms of like a champagne and gold shimmer. I just absolutely love this palette and have never stopped. So in terms of all-time favorite palette, this was instantly the palette that came to my mind without even having to like look at my palette collection. I just knew it. Next up is a new favorite, and this is just like basic bitch level boring, but truly this is an absolute favorite right now. This is the NARS Rising Orgasm palette, and I freaking love this palette. I will say when I first got this palette and opened it, I was kind of mad because I was like, this looks exactly like the Summer Solstice palette from NARS, which I love and which I own and love. But I was like, really, like I wouldn't have purchased this. And while the two are very similar, I have swatched them side by side, and there are some differences. I love this, and I love the Summer Solstice, and this just reminded me like how much I love the NARS formula when it's done right. The NARS Summer Solstice is what made me fall in love with NARS, and I just have not been able to stop reaching for this, and I just know this is going to be a top used palette in my collection this year because it's just so easy, so versatile, and just so good. Next up is a palette that I keep for the memories, and I actually just included this palette in my chopping block video, and I don't think I'll be able to declutter it because I truly do keep this palette just for the memories, and I don't know why, but it's the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette, and it's not like I have like a super specific special memory attached to this palette, but I remember being so excited to buy this palette. I talk about this all the time. I used to be like a festy girl, so when I purchased this, I was like, oh, the festival like theme of this like speaks to my old festy vibes. But it's not like I do colorful makeup all that often, although I do have two pans right here and a pan right here. Like I've been able to make this palette work for me neutrally, and I have like a very specific go-to look. When I purchased this palette got so much love, and even like the year or two, like I owned this for a solid year or two and used this so much in that solid year or two when I still didn't have a very large makeup collection. So I feel like that also plays a factor in this. I feel like this was one of like my first palette purchases when I really started to get into makeup, which could be why I like have such a nostalgic tie to this. But this one is one that I keep around for the memories because I do have colorful shadows throughout my collection. Like I'm not keeping this palette for like specific shades of shadow that I want. It's because of the memories. Next up is an underrated palette, and I kind of struggled with this one a little bit because I just feel like I own like so many like very hyped up palettes, but I ultimately landed on the Glamlight Chocolate Martini palette, and I feel like this collection like got buzz, but then like after like it released, it was just kind of like forgotten about. And then specifically I feel like people were, and I say people like I'm making an assumption for people, but like least excited about this palette just because it was like the boring basic neutral palette. And I will say when I first saw this release, I was going to get the green palette, and I was like, who would ever get the Chocolate Martini palette? Like you're getting like, this collection is about color, why would anyone get the Chocolate Martini? And then I think it was Lauren from Lauren Made Beauty. I saw her do a video with this, and she was talking about how in person there's actually a lot more like versatility in this palette, and there really is. Like when you see this in person, there's a lot of differences within even some of the matte shades that look very similar, and I have created so many looks with this palette that I absolutely love. In 2021, there's like one of my favorite looks that I created all year. It sticks out in my head. I used this palette and I just absolutely loved it. I just felt so pretty using this palette, so I definitely think that this one is an underrated one. Next up is not a favorite but can't get rid of, and this is the first palette that instantly came to my mind. This is the Natasha Denona Zendo palette, and this just wasn't Natasha Denona level quality in my opinion. I just feel like this palette I was so excited for, and it really ended up being like a huge disappointment. It's not like so bad that it's unusable, but it just like wasn't great in my opinion. But I feel like I have so many other Natasha palettes, I'm kind of getting like almost like collector's mentality with it that I just couldn't get myself to declutter. And again, it's not so bad, and I spent my money on it, so I can't get myself to declutter, but I was really wanting this to be a whole lot more than it ended up being. So that would definitely be the one that I don't love, but I can't get myself to declutter. Next is my favorite collab, and that would be the Oden's Eye Hella palette. I freaking love this palette. And again, not necessarily like a palette color story that's super inside my comfort zone. I don't do a lot with pinks very often, but I absolutely adore this palette. The mattes are so good. The shimmer is like this chartreuse limey green. Like, honestly, these two shades, well, this shade I figured I would like, but this one I wasn't expecting to literally love as much as I do. This shade double-sided is truly one of my most used shades in my collection, and especially of last year. I was using this all the time, and I swear I'm so close to pan on this, but now like the shade is starting to like crumble in on itself. I am bound and determined to hit pan on this shade this year. Also, the shade River is this really beautiful like blue brown duochrome shade that I just absolutely love. Such a good palette. Angie did such a good job, and I obviously love the Oden's Eye formula. So favorite collab, easy peasy answer, the Hella palette from Oden's Eye. Next is a 2022 favorite, and this was definitely an unexpected favorite of last year, but I really ended up loving the Clarity Cosmetics So Amazing palette and feel like I got a ton of use out of this. I was loving a yellow inner corner highlight on the eyes last year, and so Don't Be Shellfish as well as Fintastic got a ton of use in that respect. But I also just love all of the shimmer shades in this palette. I feel like all of them are very unique and special. Clarity Cosmetics has a really good formula. I don't reach into the mattes as much, and I don't know if I've ever done just like a full look using just this palette, but I love this palette for the shimmers. So that was definitely a favorite of 2022. Next up is a palette that I didn't expect to love, and for that, I'm going with the Kaleidos Sashimi City. I actually wasn't going to purchase this palette, but then I was purchasing the Futurism 6 palette and decided to just toss this in as well. And I have fallen head over heels with this palette. I've loved this palette for a couple of years now, ever since I've owned it. I always get compliments when I use this palette to create looks because these two shimmer shades just add such an intense sparkle to the eye. It's so pretty. You can really make this palette like every day, but then you can really amp it up with the shimmer shades because they just add this like, I'm gonna say like Barbie like sparkle. It's such a pretty palette. I absolutely adore it. Who would have thunk a 7-pen palette would have turned into an absolute love? But it definitely did, and you truly cannot go wrong with the Sashimi City in my opinion. And then the final prompt in my final palette is a palette that sparks joy, and for me that is the ColourPop Lemoncello palette. I just so vividly remember when I got this palette. And a day or two after this, like I received this, or even like the day that this got mailed and it arrived at my house, my family and I went to South Dakota on sort of like a last minute, like spur of the moment weekend trip. And I just have really good memories of that trip. And I took this palette with me, and I was so excited to bring it with me and start testing it out. And it just reminds me of like the spring, because this is like when the palette released in the springtime. I love the matte shades as well as the shimmers. I think to like the standard eye, this might look like a very boring basic palette, but there's actually a ton of versatility in this one as well, with the pops of like the yellow and the orange, the green, the blue, the yellow shimmer, which is such a beautiful inner corner highlight as well. This palette always comes traveling with me now, and this is one that I just can't put down, but it truly just does spark joy when I look at it. The yellows and the blues, the packaging, everything about this. I love this one from ColourPop. All right, you guys, and after that, that is going to wrap up day 5 of palette week. That's gonna wrap up this palette tag video. I would love to know some of your answers in the comments below. Let's chat about some palettes. Leave me your comments as well about other palette themed content you would like to see from me, whether it be during palette week or just here and there throughout the weeks. You guys know I love talking about palettes, so let me know what you want to see. Anyway, that's gonna wrap it up for today's video. Thank you so much for sticking around to watch, for supporting me, supporting my channel, supporting palette week. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Bye.